The Sea of Galilee was not a gentle place. It sat cupped in a bowl of hills in the northern part of Israel, a freshwater lake about 13 miles long, 8 miles wide. And those hills that surrounded it had a way of funneling wine down from the heights without warning. Fishermen who had worked these waters their whole lives knew the feeling. The way a calm evening could shiver and turn, the way the stars would disappear behind rolling cloud, the way the surface would go from glass to fury in the time it took to say a prayer. These were men who respected the water. They had grown up with it. They had lost people to it. It was the disciples of Jesus, 12 ordinary men, most of them with calloused hands and salt in their beards, who pushed off from the northeastern shore that night after what had been the most extraordinary day any of them had ever witnessed. Jesus had fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish. 5,000. And there had been leftovers. 12 baskets full. They had gathered the fragments themselves, these men, bending down in the grass, their hands trembling slightly, not entirely sure what they had just seen. Now Jesus had sent them ahead across the water to Bethsaida, while he stayed behind to dismiss the crowd. And somewhere in that evening, alone on a hillside, he had gone to pray. The boat moved out into the dark, and the question that no one said aloud hung over them like low cloud. Who is this man we are following? By the time the 4th watch of the night had come, somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning, the disciples had been rowing for hours. Hours. Matthew tells us the boat was already a considerable distance from land, and yet they had not crossed. The wind was against them. That is the language the scripture uses, against them. And anyone who has ever rowed a heavy wooden boat into a headwind knows exactly what that means. It is exhausting in a way that reaches down into your bones. Your arms burn. Your back aches. The oar handles grow slick with spray and sweat. And the shore you are trying to reach does not seem to get any closer. The Sea of Galilee at that hour, in that wind, would have been a dark and violent thing. Waves striking the bow, sloshing up over the gunwales, soaking the men to the skin. The boat would have groaned and creaked. The sound of the water, that constant roaring, hissing, slapping of wave after wave, would have swallowed every other sound. The stars, if they could be seen at all, would have been swinging and tilting with the motion of the hull. And then someone saw it. We don't know who saw it first. Perhaps it was Peter. He had that kind of sharp, scanning attention, the instinct of a man used to watching the water for signs. Or perhaps it was John. But someone looked out across the surface of the churning lake, and in the gray pre-dawn darkness, they saw a figure. A figure, walking on the water, not swimming, not clinging to wreckage, walking, upright, moving steadily across the surface of that storm-tossed sea as though the waves beneath him were simply a road. The terror that broke out in that boat was total. Matthew says they cried out in fear, ekraxon, in the Greek, a word that carries the sound of raw panic, of men who believed they were seeing a ghost, a phantom, something that should not exist. Because of course a man cannot walk on water. A man cannot do that. Every one of them knew it. And so the only explanation their minds could reach for was something supernatural and terrible, a spirit of some kind, something from the deep, something wrong. They were already exhausted. They were already cold and soaked and frightened by the storm. And now this. It is worth sitting with that fear for a moment. Because what they felt was not simple surprise. It was the deep, gut-level terror of encountering something that breaks the rules of reality as you understand them. The kind of fear that empties a person out. The kind that makes strong men cry out like children. And then, through the wind, across the water, a voice. Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. 3 sentences. Calm as dawn. Unmistakable. It was Jesus. And it was Peter who spoke next. Simon Peter, always the first to act, always the one whose heart ran ahead of his caution. Peter, who had left his nets and his boat and his livelihood to follow this man. Peter looked at that figure walking on the water and said something remarkable. Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water. If, that single word is everything. It is not cold skepticism. It is not a challenge. It is the voice of a man on the knife edge between terror and wonder, between what he knows is impossible and what he has watched this rabbi do with bread and fish and demons and disease. It is the voice of a man who wants to believe so desperately that he is willing to step out of a boat in the middle of a storm on the word of a single syllable. Jesus said, come. One word. One word. and Peter swung his leg over the side of that wooden boat. Think about what that moment must have felt like. The other disciples grabbing for him, perhaps, or simply frozen, watching. The spray hitting his face. The boat lurching beneath him. The howl of the wind. And Peter, looking at Jesus, shifting his weight, and setting his foot down on the surface of the Sea of Galilee. And it held. The water held. He stood on it. The waves rose and fell around him, and he stood on them as though they were solid ground, and he took a step. And another. He was walking on water. He was walking on water toward Jesus in the middle of a storm, and for one suspended, shining, impossible moment, the laws of nature had simply made room for faith. But then he felt it, the wind. It hit him full in the face, buffeting, tearing, and he looked away from Jesus. He looked at the waves. He looked at the storm. And the moment he looked at the storm instead of at the one who had called him out of the boat, he began to sink. Lord, save me. Immediate. Desperate. The prayer of a drowning man. And immediately, that word again, immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said. Why did you doubt? Not a condemnation. Not a dismissal. A question. Gentle and searching. The kind of question a teacher asks when they want the student to find the answer for themselves. Why did you doubt? You were doing it. You were walking. What changed? And when they climbed back into the boat together, Jesus and Peter, soaking, the wind dying down around them, the men in that boat did something they had not done before in all their time with him. They worshipped him, fell at his feet, there in the wet, rocking hull, and said, Truly you are the Son of God. Something had broken open in them. This story has lived for 2,000 years because it tells the truth about what it means to be human in the presence of the divine. We all know what it is to be in the storm, exhausted, disoriented, the wind against us, the shore not getting any closer. We all know what it is to see something beyond our understanding and feel the cold hands of fear close around our hearts. And we all know, in our better moments, what it is to hear a voice through the dark and feel something in us rise to meet it. Not certainty, not the absence of fear, but the impossible impulse, against everything reasonable, to swing our leg over the side. Peter sank. Let that be said plainly. He took his eyes off Jesus, and he sank. But he also walked. He walked on water, and he walked because he got out of the boat. There is a kind of faith that stays dry, and a kind that gets wet and trembling and reaches out its hand in the dark. The hand that reaches back is already there.